But just to start off, I'll kick off at a high level. We've got data from distribution centers, coffee shops, and retail stores to look in this example. And the most useful place to start is the electricity consumption used store by store across a portfolio. So this is useful for sustainability managers or perhaps those in head offices who want to highlight the energy that's being used in different buildings. And we can see here that, as expected, the consumption would be relatively similar, given that the operation is retail stores owned by the same company, similar size in terms of the operation. But what we're going to do is dig a little bit deeper and find some highlights out of this data. So what I'm going to do here is select a couple of sites to graph so we can look at how they use their data comparably site on site. And interestingly, I've got a void unit in there. So void unit, as you'd expect, using very little data, not having tenants in. Just as a side story, actually, we've had not one but multiple commercial units who, through monitoring, have identified unwanted occupants, growing things that they probably shouldn't be. And the spikes in the data allowed them to take immediate action to secure the properties and manage what could have been high electricity bills and costly repairs. So I'll come back to this data set though. And at first, if we have a look at retail unit 2, we can go into some granular data about how the energy is used on a daily basis. Forgive me while my screen catches up. What we can see here on the 19th of February is a little bit of energy being used outside of hours, as you'd expect, that increasing during shop operational hours. And an unusual data set actually at the end, you may expect the energy to drop off there. Perhaps staff have turned heating on for some activity outside of the normal operating hours. We can go further into that, and I just need to move things around into the combined statistics page, where we look at how the electricity is used on each phase. So for a lot of you running commercial buildings, you'll have 3 phases of power. What we're doing is providing a granular breakdown of where that power is used per phase, so that you can identify easily the time and the phase in which that power was drawn. So real insights into starting that journey in reducing energy use. Let's look at retail unit 4 now. This was the higher consuming of the 2 sites. And if I go to the same day previously, the 19th of February, you'll see that there's been active energy management. Here we go. Active energy management on this site already. So I think it's quite normal in terms of looking at a portfolio to pick the lowest hanging fruit first. And in this example, they're actively switching off the power at night to reduce that consumption, yet they're still the higher consuming of the sites. And the interesting learning in this for me is that whilst the first step has been taken to reduce the power at night, if I look across the rest of the portfolio, how do we share those learnings with other site managers to show how to reduce those out-of-hours costs? So real lesson there, I think it ties in with what Pierre was saying about the first step is management. The next step is how do you share that information? I think you'll find that about 20% of electricity used on average is out of hours. If we could cut 10% of that across your portfolio, that's a significant change. A small piece here on the data that we do provide. So consumption, as you'd expect, If you like to manage things in terms of cost, we've got the cost per day for operating the site. Quite easily change that on the graph so you know on an hourly basis what it's costing. We've got power factor. That is the relationship between the energy drawn and how efficiently it's drawn. And it feeds directly into something called your peak demand or your KVA. KVA is becoming increasingly important to manage. Most of you will have a standing charge on your invoice and a maximum capacity for the site. And the demand is how much you're drawing. So ultimately, you want some leverage between what you're drawing and what the peak that you should be drawing is. That helps you avoid things like excess capacity charges. And more importantly, these days, if we're looking at reducing our gas usage and replacing that with electricity appliances, how much room have you got to move before you may need to upgrade your site? So useful in terms of the normal operation. And of course, if you're looking at EV chargers, which draw a lot of load, this data is going to really support the direction that you take with that. What I also found interesting was when I reviewed the portfolio of coffee shops, we had a very similar, found very similar instances where the highest consuming site, if I go into that, the highest consuming site actively manages the energy outside of hours, but that behavior hasn't yet been shared across the portfolio. So I'm just I guess reiterating that message that taking the learnings from one site and sharing across the portfolio adds real value. Going to look at the detail quickly, actually, on the larger of the consuming sites. And we're just going to go to look at the phases and how the power is used across the phases. What we can see from this is, again, that active energy management, no power used until the site's turned on. And then with these three lines together, the three phases, that means that primarily the energy used on site is from three-phase equipment. And actually the recent findings on this is the coffee machine that's used on site is significantly older than the others, drawing a lot more load. And they also had some heating ovens that weren't in place on other stores, but they've got down to that detail. And then this data supports the return on investment to replace those appliances. Right, let's touch on distribution centers just for a slightly different look and feel. So here we've got monitoring on water, gas, and power. And we will compare what happens in the gas across the site. So again, same company, same square footage, very different profiles. So here we see Centre 3 using significantly more gas than 2, and we've got the opportunity to go down and see why that is. And the interesting finding for me here was actually what appeared to be the low-hanging fruit, which was the highest consuming site. The first thing that we found is a site that has operating hours of 7 till 7 actually has their gas running all night for heating. So what an immediate find to reduce the gas usage by 30 to 50%. When we look at the water data, this really verifies for us the occupancy on site. Outside of using occupancy sensors, water is a great way to do it. And the water, as we can see there, it's typically used for welfare services. So no water consumed while the site's unoccupied. And then the general welfare water used through the day. We did actually pick up on one more thing water-wise that's really worth touching on. This is on the second site. And while the site is unoccupied, actually there's a water leak. So very clearly here we can see through the night there's water leaking that we wouldn't usually expect. And what an opportunity that is to get on top of things quickly, not necessarily from a water bill cost, but from reducing the cost to repairs. For those who provide any billing for tenants, we have a module here which I can touch on quickly. So this is used either if you run an estate and need to invoice your tenants, or if you're just looking to set a forecast for your costs before you receive your supplier bills. You simply select the month of January, the electricity cost, the gas cost, and the water cost. And then you can issue that statement directly to your tenants. In terms of data, we have this for visualization. There's always the opportunity to export into Excel if you need to shift the data into other management systems that you have. And we provide APIs of data as well, daily, weekly, or monthly, that can go direct into your management systems and also to your carbon consultants to support your carbon reporting. Lastly, in terms of the monitoring, I've given you a very quick overview of monitoring at a building level. Of course, we can go down to more granular detail in monitoring estates, buildings, floors, phases within the floors. So naturally, the first part for our clients is understanding their total load before venturing into that granular detail of monitoring and how they put active controls around their energy consumption. So I hope that's been useful for you. I believe there's a necessity for energy managers, tenants, and landlords to work together in order to achieve sustainability goals. And by aligning the tenants and landlords, we move beyond compliance, hello ESOS, into that real world of measurable impact. And that together, for us to tackle our Scope 3 emissions, we need to drive meaningful change.